Hi everyone, it's James and welcome back to another episode of Crosswires, the tech podcast where we try and look at all sorts of technology from an ethical and more sort of interesting point of view. And today, you've actually heard my guest mentioned on previous episodes and has been accused, maybe unfairly, of war crimes against Amigas. I brought him here today. You know, we believe in equal opportunities on this podcast. Everyone's... Sorry, we've got a video chat going through Squadcast, so I can see Rees sort of just sat there smirking. So
just rolling my eyes.
Please welcome Rees from Ctrl Alt Rees. Hello.
Hello, James. Thank you very much for having me on to defend the ST's honour.
Indeed. You know, this all stems from, just so people are aware, it stems from an RMC live video where Rees nearly took a table saw to an Amiga 600, which was painful to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that it's all good-natured, you know. It's we're all friends, really, aren't we? So
yeah, absolutely.
Perhaps a slight trick of the camera. I don't think it was quite that close, but you know.
I was going to say, how close did it actually get?
Well, you know, it's Hollywood magic, isn't it? You know, there's camera angles, and I can neither confirm nor deny any harm occurring to any Amigas on my channel. So. But no, it's all in good fun, isn't it? So
absolutely, no, absolutely. I've poked my own share of fun. I think I've blown up the Amiga section in SimCity, Atari section in SimCity 2000. Oh. Anyway, as you said, it's all good fun, and obviously we've spoken many times in DMs on the RMC Retro Discord server, and really glad to have you here. And I thought before we kind of talk about the Atari and get a little bit into the ST. Why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself, how you got started, what you actually do, and where this Atari obsession came from? Because it's a very strange obsession.
Yeah, well, you can entirely blame my family for that. So, yeah, I suppose I could start from the top, really, with the whole Atari thing. So, yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, we used to do the big family Christmas thing. You know, the whole kind of extended family would descend upon an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent's house every Christmas for Christmas Day. And it was one ill-fated year. I think it was probably around 1988, 89. I would have been 4 or 5. And we were at my uncle's house, and my cousin had just got an Atari 2600 Junior. So not the wood grain model, but the later, the smaller plastic one. And obviously we spent the whole time locked in his bedroom for the whole of Christmas Day playing on this Atari 2600. And to me, at that kind of age, and to be able to interact with something on the TV and to kind of move the joystick around and have something moving on the TV screen was quite a revelation. And I know it's something that we take for granted nowadays with computers and games consoles and stuff. But you know, obviously I thought it was the best thing ever. So, yeah, from that point onwards, I begged my parents, and, you know, I must have been incredibly annoying. I mean, I was quite an annoying kid anyway, but, yeah, you know, it was, I want an Atari. And you would think that they would finally snap and give in, but actually there was a bit of a stepping stone in the form of the Acorn Electron, which I think was already kind of outdated by that point. I'm not quite sure where my dad actually got it from. I don't know if he bought it out of the back of the paper or got it from a co-worker or something like that. But yeah, my parents were kind of very big believers in computers over games consoles, and you know, wanted something I could do my homework on, and didn't want to stretch to a brand new computer. So yeah, this Acorn Electron appeared. Played with that for a couple of months, and then it exploded. So literally plugged it in, hit the switch, huge bang, smoke pouring out of the thing. Obviously now in hindsight, knowing what I know now, I guess it was probably a reefer capacitor in the power supply. But at the time it was pretty catastrophic, and obviously my mum was terrified it was going to burn the house down, and my dad was running out into the garden with it, and all this kind of stuff. And it was that Christmas that they got me the Atari STE. So I don't really know what. I like to think that me begging them for an Atari specifically maybe had some kind of influence on that, but I don't actually know how the conversation went and how they kind of went with the STE over the Amiga or anything else that was kind of available at the time. But yeah, that's pretty much what set me up for this lifetime obsession. I've always been into like making silly little videos and that kind of stuff. When I was a kid, my parents had a camcorder, and I used to make like magic videos and all this kind of crazy stuff, filming my sister and her friends dancing around and all kinds of random stuff. And then through college, I had camcorders and these little SD card cheapo camcorder things. And so the two hobbies were bound to combine at some point. Obviously, watching people like 8-Bit Guy and LGR and kind of those early tech YouTube channels and thinking, oh, I could do that. I'm interested in old computers and I'm interested in, making videos. And yeah, evidently, at some point, I decided it would be a good idea to start a retro tech YouTube channel. So yeah, I kind of first started on Instagram, just posting pictures of stuff, and then that got quite a big following. And then I thought, no, I'll take the opportunity and I'll make the jump and I'll go for it. That was around November 2019. I uploaded my first video. There's a whole interesting story behind that if you want to hear it.
Yeah, by all means.
Yeah, so I've been posting quite a lot of... I've been modifying consoles, doing video mods on them and stuff like that, and posting pictures of that on Instagram. And Jason Bradbury, of all people, contacted me, the guy from the Gadget Show.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I want a Famicom that I can use in my social media posts and stuff. So the Famicom is the Nintendo Family computer, basically the original Japanese version of the NES.
Mm-hmm.
He said, could you get your hands on one and modify it for me? And I want to use it in some of my social media posts and stuff. And I acquired one and modified it and sent it over to him. And he said, can you do me an Atari 2600? So I did the Atari 2600. And it was at that point I thought I should probably record this process just in case I want to make it into a video. And recorded some clips of me doing the modification and kind of talking through it and how it all worked and that kind of thing. And that became the very first video on my channel. So yeah, it started big, name dropping Jason Bradbury. I think all of about 10 people watched that video, but you have to start somewhere. Yeah, and then kind of got in with the whole RMC crowd. A lovely bunch of people, very supportive. They obviously seem to enjoy what I'm doing, and it's kind of gone from strength to strength, really. So still enjoying it, still sticking at it. I know a lot of people have kind of started, projects during lockdown and stuff that now they're kind of free to leave the house and get on with their lives that have kind of been put on the back burner. But I'm still committed. I'm still very much on it. So
no, and obviously I've watched a fair number of videos and they are fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have to say that, really. No, very, very interesting start, though. And I guess that actually leads me on to a nice question. So obviously you talk about video modding these old consoles. Now, for maybe our younger listeners, these old consoles, a lot of them, they didn't have, you forget HDMI, a lot of them didn't even have composite or S-Video or SCART. They had good old-fashioned RF. In fact, I think I remember the NES, the one at least we got here, had composite out.
Yes, it did.
But I'm guessing some of the earlier Ataris, right, the 2600, probably didn't. They were probably RF.
Yeah, so, Atari, obviously the original 2600, that launched back in 1977. No such thing as HDMI, but no composite or anything. So that was very much an RF job. All the way through to even the 5200, the 7800, even they were RF as well. Like you say, the Nintendo had composite. The original Japanese version, the Famicom, didn't. So obviously getting these things hooked up to some kind of TV that doesn't have a tuner, some kind of display like a PVM type CRT, a professional broadcast CRT or something like that, or getting it hooked up to an upscaler for a modern HDMI TV or for sort of capture for streaming and that kind of stuff, you need to modify them. Basically involves tapping into the video circuitry internally, amplifying that signal and kind of outputting it in such a way that makes sense for those other devices to be able to display. And depending on the console, sometimes it's relatively straightforward, and sometimes it involves replacing quite a chunk of the actual guts of the console. So, but yeah, great place to get started with kind of electronics and that kind of stuff, because obviously there's a lot of really good guides out there and a lot of kits and things like that. As long as you can pick up a soldering iron and vaguely wave it in the right direction, they're quite fun things to put together.
And of course, even if you were just wanting to connect one of these to your modern TV, well, any TV sold, probably in the last I'd say at least 5 years, it will possibly it will have a RF input, but it won't have an analog tuner, because of course here in the UK we've gone entirely to digital. So you won't have any way to tune that analog signal. So you'll need something, even if it's just composite. Okay, your standard TV is not going to do a great job of upscaling composite video. But hey, you can find, if you find some CRTs or, good old fashioned like bedroom tellies. I remember having this very old thing that we used with the Amiga. It was something we got from my nana's sister. And that's how old it was. And, we were doing it through RF. So I never had the best experience with my Amiga. We never had an actual monitor for the Amiga.
I think, to be fair, obviously that's how most of us experienced these things back in the day. I had a small, a portable TV in my bedroom when I was a kid. And that's how I used the ST and the Acorn Electrod as well. So I know in our minds it's all crystal clear and kind of up to modern standards, but I think back in the day it was very, very fuzzy, and a lot of it was kind of imagination filling in the gaps. So even composites are a big step up from that.
Yeah, to be fair, in my case, I just couldn't tell the difference because my eyesight's so bad anyway, so I was fine, it was all good to me. Anyway, let's talk some Atari, because you mentioned the STE. Now, this wasn't Atari's first home computer. Correct me if I'm wrong, they had the 400, the 600, and the 800?
Yeah, so the first two that launched were the 400 and the 800 back in 1979. I actually have.
Oh, ta-da.
Not that this is on video, but I do have an 800 here. Probably my favourite machines, actually, of the entire Atari range over the years, because I think the Atari 8-bit computers had, certainly early on, they had the best arcade conversions and some of the best games on them, and they were really, really capable machines compared to stuff like the Commodore 64 and the Spectrum and other stuff that was around at the time. Quite expensive, sort of higher-end machines when they first launched, but like the 800's got a really nice mechanical keyboard on it, and it's a really sort of big, solid thing. So yeah, they were kind of the first two computers that they launched. There was the ST, obviously, in 1985. They carried on with the 8-bit range all the way up until the early 90s. So there was the XL, like you say, there was the 600, the XE range, 65 and the 130 XE. So yeah, I'm kind of known as an Atari ST guy because that's the computer that I had back in the day, and that's the one that I have on my desk. But actually, being entirely honest, that I think the 8-bit's probably, like I say, probably my favourite of the entire range. So, and that's before you even get into the consoles and the Pong machines and everything else. So,
yeah,
a long and illustrious history with Atari, definitely.
And Atari, not taking into account what they're up to these days, but less said about the current NFT antics were better. Oh. But we go back, they had so much, and I think. You talk about the 800 and 400 being expensive machines. I think that was quite common in the higher end, and particularly because a lot of these machines were aimed at the American market, where the American market had, not to put too fine a point, they had more disposable income for these sort of things than us Brits did. We had to put up with our speckies and our, cheaper machines. Interesting, of course, as I said, the Amiga took off massively here, and I know the ST did as well. I remember having a friend in childhood who had an ST. I'm afraid can't remember what model it was. But as you said, you're known for being an ST guy. Now, what would you say is was the defining model of the ST? Because I always get a little bit confused between the ST, the STE, the STFM. I remember, is it the 520s, the 1040? Yeah, help me out here, Rees.
Right. You want a complete unabridged history of the ST, do you? Because I can do that. How long have you got?
Yeah, let's keep it to the cliff notes, to the highlights.
Yeah. So obviously there was the original the 260 and the 520 ST back in 1985. I have done a video on the 260 ST on my channel. Bit of a shameless plug there. Contrary to popular belief, the 260 ST wasn't a 256K machine. That was a 512K machine, just like the 520. And then they integrated the floppy drive and the RF modulator into the machine internally, which was the STFM, with the F standing for floppy and the M standing for modulator.
Mm-hmm.
this is where we have to start to think about timescales and the launch of the Amiga and all of that kind of stuff. I know we don't mention the A word on my channel, or not that A word. But of course, the original ST, like I say, launched in '85, and then I think it was the Amiga 1000 came the year after that in '86, I think.
Sounds about right, yeah.
I've been researching this for an upcoming video, so hopefully I'll get my dates and things right. And then I think the 500 was the year after that, which was, obviously the 500 was the most popular machine that kind of most people had back in the day. And yeah, I mean, it would be dishonest of me to say that, the ST and the Amiga were equal at that point. But of course, Commodore had a couple of years, to work on stuff. So that's kind of Atari's disadvantage, being the first mover in that market. But I think the kind of the trick that I think a lot of people miss is that obviously the STE was released in 1988, and that was the machine that I had back in the day. And that had the hardware scrolling, and it had the extended palette, and it had the blitter, and, the proper DSP audio chip, and it was basically on par with the Amiga 500. And Atari kind of massively cut the price of the ST-FM, which was the original ST. I can see you thinking here, trying to keep up with this convoluted timeline that I'm spinning. Of course. So in my mind, obviously the STE was kind of the direct competitor to the Amiga 500, and Atari kind of continued to sell the ST-FM as the budget machine.
Right.
I think the ST-FM's really important because it was a budget machine. It was about 150 quid cheaper than the STE and the Amiga 500, which were both quite expensive machines when they first launched.
Oh, yeah.
And it kind of served the same purpose as the Spectrum had done a few years before, and kind of it was an entry point for a lot of people to get into the sort of 16-bit era and get on board with a proper computer with a graphical user interface and everything else that perhaps couldn't have otherwise got into it, couldn't have otherwise afforded it. So this is why I sometimes get a bit frustrated with the whole ST and Amiga debate, because there's a lot to it. It's quite complicated. And obviously on the Amiga side as well, obviously there was the 1000 at first, which was a really amazing, really sort of groundbreaking machine, really big in kind of the video production world and that kind of stuff. And then obviously there was the 500 and then the 600. The 600 really forward-looking with the PCMCIA slot and the internal IDE interface and all that kind of stuff. So I'm certainly not a fanboy. I do know my history, and I am working on researching it all and getting it all straight in my mind. But I suppose that's why I'm here today, isn't it? To put my case forward.
Absolutely. Do you know, but one thing it was something that always made me sort of curious about the ST line was those amazingly slanted function keys. I don't know what it was about them. It's just a bit different. It felt modern.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps I'm biased, but I think out of the two, I do prefer the look of the ST. I think it was very sort of futuristic when it came out. I know Atari had quite a famous, and I can't remember the name of the guy, but had quite a famous industrial designer working for them at the time who was known for sort of furniture and architecture and that kind of stuff. Also designed like the XL line and that kind of stuff as well. So it
certainly comes off. It's certainly, and even just little things like on again the ST, but the floppy drive doesn't. It looks just a little bit different. But the opening for a floppy compared with the Amiga or say a PC at the time. Well, I mean, I guess at the time most PCs were on 5.25 inch floppies, but yeah, there's something about the ST. And of course, but one big advantage, or out of the box, but now correct me if I'm wrong, was this an STE feature or was this just an ST line feature, MIDI ports?
Yeah, so the very first machines, all the way back in 1985, had the MIDI ports. I think that's kind of the other thing that's kind of important to consider when you look at the history of the ST, is that it was really intended as a competitor to the Apple Mac. So obviously it launched, the Mac was kind of gaining ground in music production and that kind of stuff. So they said, well, this thing has to have MIDI ports so we can compete on that front. And the ST was launched with a high resolution monochrome mode and a really, really, really sharp, really excellent quality high resolution monochrome monitor as well. And then things like modems and laser printers and all that kind of stuff. So with the original ST, and obviously going on into the STFM as well. It was really designed as a kind of, a business machine, and as a kind of, music production and kind of serious work. And the gaming aspect of it was kind of a secondary consideration. Obviously, Atari being Atari, gaming was always going to be something that they had to provide for, and something that they had to address. But obviously it was known as the Jackintosh back in the day, after Jack Tramiel, the CEO of Atari. So obviously once the Amiga launched, obviously mentioning the Amiga again, but you're an Amiga guy, I know that. But
yep. Are you feeling okay there, Rees? Are you doing all right?
Okay.
You're all right.
I'm doing all right. Obviously the Amiga launched, and that was a much more gaming-focused machine. And then, like I say, Atari kind of had to play catch-up a little bit with the STE and kind of address that side of things as well. But, because of that kind of business focus and the availability of, that kind of business-focused accessories like laser printers and modems and all that kind of stuff, the ST was really big in Eastern Europe as a business machine. And like Germany and Scandinavia. And I get a lot of comments on my ST videos from people in that part of the world saying, I remember using one of these at work back in the day. And I'm thinking, well, we had them as kids in our bedroom as a gaming machine, and you had an office full of them, and you were doing desktop publishing and word processing on them and stuff. So another kind of aspect that I think does get overlooked.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, going back to the Amiga thing, the thing that always blew my mind as an Amiga user was that, and admittedly it was only for the first season, but the VFX for Babylon 5, which is one of my favourite sci-fi shows, I don't care what anybody says, it is a wonderful series, were done on the video toaster, which was was an Amiga thing. And it was done using Lightwave 3D, I believe, and video toaster, which is incredible.
It is.
Also, we think, again, going back to that whole MIDI thing, I know lots of musicians who used Atari STs. I think there's a famous musician who still uses an ST.
Is it Fatboy Slim?
It is Fatboy Slim.
It is. He did quite a famous interview a few years ago on YouTube with one of the big, I can't remember who it was now, but it was one of the big sort of audio equipment manufacturers, and he did like a home studio tour. And he still had his ST in pride of place, and he was still actually using it to make music on. And this was in like 2017 or something. But yeah, I mean, obviously, like on top of the pops back in the day, you had like Pet Shop Boys on top of the pops with their Atari STs on stage up and running. I guess they were just props. I'm sure they weren't actually playing stuff live. But
since when were any of the performances on top of a pops live? Yeah,
there's I need to find it really. There's a video of a music festival back in the early 90s, and the Prodigy are playing.
Okay.
And there's a guy in the background at the back of the stage on an Atari ST. And as they're going through the songs and the different parts of the songs, he's frantically swapping floppy disks, and he's got like a floppy disk box on a little stand next to the computer. I remember seeing it a couple of years ago, and I haven't found it since, but I really need to dig that up because it's quite amusing to watch.
So either he was doing music, or he was having a few little rounds of Rick Dangerous while he was
maybe.
Maybe. You never know. Anyway, so that was the ST, a great machine. Now, of course, we could talk so much about all the different machines, and I think there's probably two I wanted to ask you about, because I know you've got some experience with at least one of these. The Falcon.
The Falcon.
Now, this is not a bird of prey. This was going to be, is and was going to be Atari's big next generation, big wipe everything off, out next gen machine. Before I do that, though, you mentioned Jack Tramiel, and of course, it's probably worth noting that Jack Tramiel was the founder of Commodore.
Indeed.
And of course, he went to Atari. Now, did he buy Atari? He got kicked out of Commodore. I think he bought Atari, if I remember correctly.
He did. So, yeah, Atari belonged to Warner of Time Warner Communications fame. They were looking to offload the home computer and home gaming division, and he'd been kicked out of Commodore at exactly the right time and ended up snapping it up. And of course, the other connection is Jay Miner, who you will know as the father of the Amiga, but he actually designed the chipset in the Atari 400 and 800 that we were talking about. Yep. So that was kind of where he started.
Because the Amiga was nearly a Atari machine.
Yeah. Yeah, well, obviously they were kind of going around to different manufacturers, kind of shopping the concept around, weren't they? And Atari were one of the companies that they visited. And Mr. Tramiel, being the ruthless businessman that he was, thought, no, I'm not going to pay these guys. I'm just going to rip off their idea and make my own version of it. So
sounds
as
about
it was
right.
very well known for.
Yes.
So,
anyway, the Falcon. The stories about this thing. I'll let you take it away because you know your stuff on this.
Yeah, so I've got one of the videos on my channel, and one of the things that takes pride of place on my wall is a prototype Falcon motherboard. So it was known as the Sparrow when it was in development. Was the Sparrow was the code name for it, which is obviously far less impressive. But yeah, they wanted a 68030 machine to compete with stuff like the Next Station and the Amiga 1200, and obviously that I think it was becoming obvious that was kind of going to be the next generation of that kind of hardware. And the Falcon, really powerful, really impressive machine in the end. Took off in the music world, but unfortunately, just came along at that kind of stage in Atari's life cycle when. They were having issues with funding, with cash flow, with developer relations, and I think it was becoming quite obvious that things were starting to unravel. So that was, I think it was late '92 that was released. Obviously, the Jaguar came along in '93. But it was. I think it was obvious that the writing was on the wall, and anyone out there kind of in the market for that kind of thing probably went out and bought the Amiga 1200 or a PC instead. And to be fair, I think it was probably quite a wise decision. But
unfortunately,
yeah. Still, nonetheless, an impressive machine and a good one for them to go out on. There was the TT-030, which was the other 68030 based machine that they kind of did at around the same time, which was much more kind of business focused. Yeah, I don't actually own a Falcon. I've had opportunities a long time ago when I kind of looked at them and thought, oh no, I'm not paying £200 or £300. Not paying £200 or £300 for that. That's a complete waste of money. There's nothing you can run on it, and obviously now they're selling for 10 times that. So perhaps I should have picked one up when I had the chance, but.
But as you said, it would really just be a paperweight because it didn't get that proper launch and didn't get a proper software following. You're not really going to have much to demo on it, I guess, unfortunately.
No, I mean, the one thing that it's really good at is just being a really good Atari ST because it was backwards compatible, but
that's what an Atari ST is for.
Yeah, I already own a few of those. I think I've lost count, but I don't think I need another one.
You've certainly got, obviously, as I said earlier, I can see a lot of machines behind him. There's quite a collection. It's like being in a little retro computer warehouse.
I've had that before, actually, where I've kind of had like Teams meetings and stuff for work-related stuff and accidentally left my camera on and people are like, oh, where are you? Are you at home? Are you
at B&Q?
Yeah. I think B&Q is one that's specifically been mentioned, because of the racking and just the sheer amount of stuff everywhere.
So you also mentioned the other system that I wanted to talk about because I have vivid memories of this being talked about and demoed on the wonderful Bad Influence on ITV.
Oh, yes.
Or the CITV. Now, I didn't realise, of course, that Andy Crane actually knew nothing about computers.
Yeah, that's one of these things that's kind of recently come out of the woodwork, isn't it? That, he was just doing his job as a presenter and didn't really care about the actual stuff that he was talking about. But I think he did a good job.
He did. And him and Violet Berlin and you had Z in the first few series, you had Z Wright over in the States, which was always hilarious. Like, oh yeah, we're going to let this kid into the... Yeah, okay. Look, at the time, I loved Bad Influence and still have fond memories. But when I look back now and watch some of the reviews from the kids they got to do reviews, thinking... and what I didn't realise, of course, is it was filmed at Yorkshire TV. And at the time, I was living in Leeds, literally probably a couple of miles from the studios. And I guess I never knew about it or never knew how you go and be an audience member. So
it was one of those things where, as a kid, you kind of watched it on TV and thought, oh, I really want to be in that audience. I really want to get in on that. And obviously, back in those days before the internet, it was kind of really difficult to get hold of that information. I think the other one was Junior Crystal Maze when that was on. I remember I loved Crystal Maze when I was a kid. And they had the kids version that I think was they did it occasionally as like a Christmas special or something. And I remember being really, really jealous and thinking, I want to do that.
I just remember that at Crystal Maze, I was allowed to stay up to watch Crystal Maze when I was younger. Yeah. So, Bad Influence showed off for Jaguar. I remember the ad campaigns, 32 plus 32 equals 64 and all this stuff. So, do the math, because of course, I think the Nintendo 64 wasn't, there was some claim about the Nintendo 64 not actually being 64-bit.
Oh, there was so much of it going on at the time. Everyone was obsessed with bits, and of course, it's all. I'm a software developer in my day job. I come from a computer science background, and it's just meaningless. It's just pointless. I mean, obviously, there is ultimately a deep down, a deeper technical meaning to it all, but you get a 64-bit bus and stick a 16-bit CPU on it, and you're only going to get 16-bit levels of performance. Yeah. But you can tell everyone that it's a 64-bit machine, and for marketing purposes. And of course, the man in the street doesn't know any different. But obviously, the thing about the Jag was they had the two 32-bit chips. Obviously communicating over a 64-bit bus, and that was kind of how they decided that it was a 64-bit machine. But
again, it was an impressive console. You had games on there like Alien versus Predator?
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh yes.
And so what happened? Because this wasn't their first. Obviously, it was not their first console, but it had a lot of problems.
Yeah, again, kind of what I alluded to before with the Falcon as well was it was just that period in Atari history when they were having all sorts of issues with cash flow, and they were screwing over some of their partners and their developers and not paying people properly, and it's dark times. I mean, the thing most people. The Jaguar is one of these things that, in kind of retro gaming circles and things, it's quite fashionable to hate on it and say, it was a load of rubbish. But again, speaking as an Atari fan, and trying to desperately defend my corner here and put things into their proper historical context, of course, the Jaguar was released a year before the N64 and the PlayStation.
Yep.
And when it was released, it was actually the most powerful home console on the market at the time. The issue was that they just didn't have the developer support for it. So those very early games on the system just weren't very good. And unfortunately, first impressions count. So
there were some really interesting titles. And of course they did. Now, I don't know if it got released, the Jaguar CD add-on?
Yeah, the Jaguar CD. So that came right at the very end of the Jaguar's life. They're really rare and really expensive now. Not many games released for that. I think there were 12 CD games released, and none of them really sort of fully took advantage of the technology. It was just a case of take an existing game and slap a load of FMV and stuff on it to fill the space on the CD.
Which, to be fair, is what you could probably say about the majority of the Mega CD catalogue as well.
Well, true. I suppose that was kind of the fashion at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Had this new technology and didn't really know what to do with it.
Yeah, exactly. And again, look, I'll say this, the Jaguar was certainly a more impressive console release compared with the CD32. I think the Jaguar probably did better in that sense. I mean, to be fair, anything could do better than the CD32.
It's not saying much, is it?
No. And although the Jaguar's controller was interesting to say the least, but again, I will be very honest, it was better than the CD32 one. But again, that's not hard. We were joking in our MC chat about someone getting beaten up with CD32 controllers the other day.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
The one thing the Jaguar controller did have going for it is it had lots of buttons. You never have too many buttons. In fact, I'm sitting here looking at one right now, and it's got 12, 13, 14, 16 buttons, something like that. Probably more. Because
it had like the number. It felt like someone had mated a game controller and a 1980s TV remote.
Yeah. I mean, that was something that Atari first did with the. Well, I was going to say they first did that with the 5200, but there were the keypad controllers for the 2600 as well. But the 5200 controllers actually had the telephone keypad style thing with the plastic overlays that slot over the buttons, and it's a really clever concept, really, when you when it boils down to it, because it's obviously reconfigurable depending on the game, and unfortunately, history has not been kind to the Jaguar.
No. So, moving sort of forward to where we are now, the question I asked Dan Wood when we talked about the Amiga, and briefly we'll ask you, because of course we've never talked Atari models before, but if someone's interested in, say, in picking up an original Atari, be it an ST, be it an 800, be it the 2600, what would be your advice, and what do you make of, because of course we have like modern clones of the 2600, but what would be your take on people wanting to get into Atari collecting now?
Interesting question. So the 7800 is a bit of a I hate to use the phrase hidden gem. Hardware wise, it's not really that impressive, but as far as collecting is concerned, there's loads of Atari 7800 stuff out there. A lot of it's still boxed, a lot of it's still in very good condition, and it seems to go for next to nothing, which is quite rare in the world of retro collecting at the moment. And it's backwards compatible with the 2600 as well, so if you pick up a 7800 console, you can run all those old 2600 games on it. And there's some quite good stuff on there. Certainly graphically, it wasn't a bad console. It's kind of let down a bit on the audio side of things, because it's essentially the same audio capabilities as the 2600, apart from a few games that had a Pokey chip inside them, which was the Atari 8-bit sound chip. So yeah, looking to get into collecting and kind of looking for the cheaper side of things. The 7800 is a very good one to look into. The Atari ST, to be fair, you can still pick up STFMs relatively cheap. Perhaps not so much on eBay, but like Facebook Marketplace and Gumtree and places like that. And the STFM, I mean, the vast majority of game developers developing and releasing games for the ST targeted the STFM because it was the lowest common denominator. So it runs 99% of the games that are out there perfectly happily. Pick one of those up, try and get one with 1 meg of RAM, or upgrade it if not. Even good condition boxed games for the ST aren't silly money just yet.
That's good.
So, two good systems to look into for collecting. As far as the 8-bit computer side of things is concerned, the later ones like the XE, they're still relatively easy to pick up. Issue with those is that, particularly in the UK, most of the games that people would have had for them back in the day would have been on cassette, and they don't tend to age well, haven't been stored very well, and that kind of stuff. Although there are, obviously, like as with everything nowadays, there are flash carts for them. So
yeah. Because of course with the ST, you will, there are, just like there's Gotex that you can put into an Amiga, the ST has a nice, people will flash the Gotex for the ST as well. So if you don't want to use the floppies, and as I reiterated with Dan, as long as you own the original games or have legally acquired them, I have to put that disclaimer onto everything these days. But yeah, you can get those images and use a Gotek, which is I think there's a bit of a rose-tinted glasses with floppy drive loading, because, we all did it back in the day, and floppy swapping. I think I remember getting a second second floppy drive for my Amiga, thinking, oh, this will help. And then, of course, realizing that not all developers have made their games external floppy aware.
No, and you have exactly the same problem on the ST as well. So, yeah, most games won't boot from an external floppy drive. On the ST, there is a device called an Ultra Satan. I've literally just released a video about this, another shameless plug. So those ST machines, going all the way back to the original 1985 machines, had external hard disk support, and the Ultra Satan is a modern hard disk emulator that plugs into that port. And there's a member of the Atari community called Patari, or PP, his initials, and he's spent about the past 15 years converting games that were originally floppy only, so they can run from things like the Ultrasate and hard disks and stuff. And there's over 1,000 of these game conversions that he's done over the years. So yeah, nowadays it's just a case of pick one of those up, download the SD card image with the 1,500 games or whatever it is, and off you go. It all just works perfectly and flawlessly. So that's probably what I would recommend. Obviously, it's a little bit more expense and a bit more outlay than just using the old original floppies, but probably well worth it if you want to see everything that the ST has to offer. Certainly a lot more convenient.
Nice. But that's similar, I'm guessing, to WHD Load on the Amiga. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I guess sort of wrapping up what you can do now with Ataris, I know there are cores for the Mr. System, and of course, we have to give our shameless plug to our friend Neil and Mr. Multi-System.
Mr. Multi-System.
I love that name. It just reminds me of Mr. Fusion in Back to the Future.
Yeah, well, of course, going off on a tangent again, obviously the multi-system name came from the Konix multi-system, or is it Konix or Konix? I can't remember, but a console that was famously developed by a bunch of, I think they were ex-Sinclair people back in the 80s, and it was cancelled and never got launched. And those same people developed they worked alongside Atari on the Jaguar. So there's a connection there as well. But the other thing I was going to say about the Mister, of course, the actual you do know where the name Mister actually came
Amiga
from?
And ST.
Yeah, it started off as a project to recreate the Amiga and the ST in FPGA, and it's kind of grown from there into this amazing thing.
Indeed. And I'm assuming, and I know this is the case, you can, RetroPie is really good. If you don't want to dabble in original hardware, RetroPie does a great job of emulating all those 2600 games. Again, as long as you legally own them.
Certainly does. I mean, as you can probably see, I'm very much into my original hardware, and I like having the hardware. Like I say, I'm kind of from a software engineering and a computer science background, so tinkering with the hardware does appeal to me a lot. But all that said, I have an NVIDIA Shield, streaming media box thing hooked up to my TV downstairs, and it has RetroArch on it, and I've got all the ROMs for, for all of the games that I legally own, as you can see on the shelves behind me. And sitting down on the sofa and just playing those with some of these 8-bit DOE wireless pads is, fantastic.
Those things are great, aren't they? They are such a nice little pad.
They are. I've got the Mega Drive one here. Actually, it's one I've been using with my multi-system. So. But yeah, great way to experience and enjoy those games, and very sort of cheap way to get into the hobby as well. So certainly not against it.
So Rees, thank you so much for joining us. Now, of course, we've whenever I record with someone, I make sure they get their obligatory plugs within the content of a podcast. But for those who haven't quite cottoned on yet, do you want to tell people where we can find your content, where we can find you on the socials, where we can stalk? No.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, good. No, that was meant to be a subtle sort of
it's like my
lead off.
The show and tell that I did with Neil right at the end, where he says, "Say goodbye," and I just sit there in silence, like one of those awkward moments.
Oh yes, that was. Oh, of course, we forgot to mention something. Just go and check out Neil's Reese's show and tell with Neil, because you get to see the video music system from Atari, which is one of the most 70s things I have ever seen. I won't spoil anything, but go and check it out.
It's one of my favourite things, but yeah, good to have an opportunity to kind of show that off. Yes. Anyway, we were doing the plug bit.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So social media, Instagram, Twitter. Apparently, I'm on Facebook as well, although that's kind of automated and I don't interact with it, which is definitely by far the best way to deal with Facebook.
Absolutely.
It's under the same name, Ctrl Alt Rees. That's REES. YouTube channel. Go like and subscribe. Ring that bell. Smash the like button. All that stuff.
I like it. You've got that patter down there, Rees. That's it. I'm liking it. Yeah, it's good. I think we just all copy pasta that now.
Oh, yes.
Anyway, thank you so much. So, speaking of liking and subscribe, Do subscribe to my podcast. We're in all the major podcast directories, all the good ones and all the really bad ones too. Wasn't that, what was that? Something that was, I can't remember what it was. It was something like, we're in all the major news agents, all the good news agents and all the really bad ones too.
Oh,
and
who was that?
That was from something, that was something from our childhood.
It was.
After it was probably one of the gaming shows. Anyway, drop us an email at podcast@crosswires.net with any questions or feedback. Hopefully my audio sounds okay this time. I'm using a new microphone and I think it sounds great, but it might turn out to be rubbish. And if that's the case, I'll fix it, honestly. Do head over to crosswires.net where you'll find the links for this episode with all the little links to Rees's videos and links to Wikipedia pages about the Atari and everything like that. All the things you might want to do a bit of reading from. And of course, crosswires.net is where the blog's housed. And don't forget crosswires.net/YouTube, where you can see all our latest YouTube videos. I've just recently posted our time capsule teardown and upgrading of Apple Airport time capsule, the one that Rees can see there. And that's had a new hard drive put in it. That's it. There you
That's
go.
the one.
That's the one. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Yes.
Bye.